but I want to go in sort of a different direction. I want to talk about buying a house, being financially stable. These are all things that young men do absolutely care about. It's also one of the issues where there's a lot of proneness or leaning towards victim mentality.
Yeah.
And the problem with victim mentality is for there to be a victim, there must be a perpetrator, right? So if you are a victim, you must be uh, being victimized by someone else, right? You have to find a scapegoat for your victimization. And the issue with victim culture is, we turn in all different directions, right? And this has been an issue. I could pull up, really old, sort of KKK propaganda, which I'm not going to do, trust me. But I could pull up really old KKK propaganda where it's showing like Irishmen taking all the jobs.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 316. I've got Ezra Wyrick, who is with he was with the Liberty Youth Coalition. Now he's with executive director of Liberty Seeds and a few other organizations. We're going to talk about a lot of this about young men in America right now. And as there's been a lot of focus on this, young men are going right and young men are voting for Trump, or they're rejecting the woke ideology, and there seems to be concern. Elsewhere, it's much more pronounced. If you, for example, check out what's going on in South Korea, the voting habits. And I wanted to bring Ezra on here to talk about this. How are you, Ezra?
I'm doing good. It's great to be back on your show. It has been a while since I've done a podcast, so I am very rusty.
Well, you just got to get on here and talk. But I know I had you on here about, well, it was almost 300 shows ago, but yeah, it's certainly, I've learned a lot too. So, I sent you this discussion with Nick Gillespie, Bradley Thompson, and that Jeremiah Johnson, and they were just talking about, outreach to young men. First of all, where do you think men, between 18 and 30 are standing right now politically?
Well, I
And
mean, I think
what are their biggest issues? What's most important to them?
well, I think men between the ages of 18 and 30 are a lot more right wing than they used to be. That's for sure. And I think that's mostly because of the rise of Trumpism and sort of populism. It kind of speaks to young men. But also, I mean, when it comes to, well, what issues do they care about? Hard to tell. I think being heard is probably the number one biggest issue for young men right now, because we have lived through decades of not being heard. No one cares what young men think. The only time that they care about what young men think is when they want us to go to war. And they're like, oh, we don't care what you think, but go die. And oh, you oppose the war? Well, too bad. You're going to go die anyway. That's the way it was in Vietnam. And, it's it's become a fundamental issue of young men being unheard. So I think oftentimes when people are unheard, they tend to gravitate towards sometimes some weird beliefs, sometimes some radical beliefs, anything that makes them feel heard. And I think in a lot of ways, Trump and MAGA has just been kind of like catnip to young male voters. And I'm still considering and I'm still thinking about why that is, but I have a few ideas.
Yeah, I have a few ideas. One of the things that's getting so prevalent in our culture nowadays is what I call victim culture, and most young men don't want to have anything to do with that. They want to go. They're ambitious. They want to go out and do things. They want to maybe build a business or conquer the world in one way or another, or maybe they just want to build their house. They don't have any interest in hearing victim stories, and we're getting so focused on that, and so often in these victim stories the villain is a young man. What can you say about that? Or young men? Yeah.
Um, well, as far as victim culture is concerned, I mean, I definitely agree with that. But there's also a lot of young men, today, I think probably the number one thing that young men want to do is be entrepreneurs. Now, the problem with that is that to be an entrepreneur takes a very specific type of person. And there are a lot of people that want to be entrepreneurs that just don't have that sort of entrepreneurial streak. And so the businesses are going to fail. But when it comes to where young men stand politically and how that relates, I think they want someone who's going to listen to how they feel about social issues in particular, because a lot of young men feel like they've been ignored when it comes to social issues. The last presidential campaign, Democratic presidential campaign of Kamala Harris, I want to get your opinion on this, Chris, because I agree with this as a young man, and you're a little bit older than I am. Do you
Yeah.
think that was probably the most woman centric campaign in history? It was basically centered almost completely around women's issues, women this, women that, women's rights, women's power. It just seemed like it was such a female centric campaign. And I'm not a misogynistic person. I love women, ask anyone. But the issue here is that there's one gender whose pet issues are being paid attention to so much, and the other gender is just kind of being left out in the cold. It felt a little bit like, oh, you've had your day. We've been listening to you for the last 100 years. So now you shut up and women are going to have the spotlight.
Yeah, that was definitely the impression I got. And, they picked a VP candidate who was a cross of Homer Simpson and Curly from the Three Stooges. And I just thought, this is not something that's going to make men want to go out and vote. I mean, there's certainly men out there who could have done that. Maybe men who are, just men who are known for getting things done. I mean, this is a guy who just doesn't really inspire confidence at all. It's Kamala Harris was, there definitely was. We might have seen it more with Hillary 8 years ago, but definitely it's really hard. I pay so little attention to them. I mean, just because they're getting more silly. I don't know if it was more maybe about the fact that Kamala wasn't white as opposed to being a man, but I've also noticed, especially in the red pill circles, there's all the guys come together and talk about issues, and there's guys of all races and colors in the red pill communities. And you find out that men really do have a lot of the same concerns, no matter what their race is. So
That's absolutely true. Yeah, there's a lot of the red pill communities out there now where men are, rejecting feminism. They're saying, you need to be strong, alpha male kind of thing, like Andrew Tate. Like, women want to be with you even if they say they don't. That kind of thing. And those can go in some very problematic directions.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, I mean, I think young men in general are just tired of not being listened to. And this is, this could just kind of tie this all together. This comes politics. It comes from politics. It comes from sex, because all different issues, men are tired of not being listened to. And what happens whenever people are tired of not being listened to is, like I said, they embrace some really weird ideas. And there's a lot of people like Andrew Tate and others that are coming out and being like, well, no, you're a man. You need to be very proud of being a man. You need to be a man more, I guess is what I'm saying. And it's like, well, yes, it's okay to be a man and it's okay to be masculine. And that would actually be great if we had more masculinity. But there are different conceptions of masculinity, and the conceptions of masculinity that are being pushed by red pill culture are not good conceptions of masculinity, and they tend to turn men into like emotionless hulks that just go around hurting people, and they have a million different girlfriends, a different girlfriend every single night. And it's like, that is not a good way to create a generation of men that are going to be functioning when they're 40 years old. You have your fun when you're 20. I'm 21 years old. So you can have your
yeah.
fun when you're 20, 25, 30, but you get up into your 40s and you're still not married, you still don't have a family, it's going to get very ugly very quickly.
Sometimes I wonder if men, teens, young men have to go through this phase where they just get this. Some people say that they just got to get it out of their system, and then once it's out, it's out. I mean, Tate is very much what he tells men, don't be afraid,
Mm.
and granted, you don't want to do things, but also he might tell you, if you're thinking about starting that business, get off your butt and start the business. Or if you're thinking about, going rock climbing and you're a little afraid, he'll tell you, don't be afraid. I mean, I think there's very much this attitude of just don't be afraid that runs through him. And granted, it can go to some negative places, but he's also very much, an attitude of go out there and do it. He once said about his father, he says, my father never read any books about chess. He just sat down and played. I don't know if you knew this about Tate, but his father was a very well-respected chess master. So
Right. And he used to do his hands like this, apparently, and that is
yeah,
why Andrew Tate does that in every single interview.
yeah, and that's one thing too. Is I always feel better when I hear a guy talk about his father in a really positive light. That turns me on, because one thing I noticed with all the guys that are into pickup and stuff, so many of these guys, it's amazing, man. All these guys really love their parents,
Mm-hmm.
and it really made me wonder. Maybe there's something to do with this, because, but there's no.
It is very appealing, and I
Yeah,
want to tie this together because I know we mostly want to talk about young men and politics, but there's obviously that element of just so many different avenues for young men. And what I'm trying to say is, well, it's not, it's not just about politics; it's about multiple different issues where young men don't feel heard, so they turn to some, frankly, wild sources in some cases, and some not so wild
yeah,
sources. There's young men that are starting to embrace a little bit of stoicism. I think that would be great. I think it would be great if young men embraced a little bit of stoicism. What I don't think would be great is if young men embrace hedonism, where it's just, oh, you do this for pleasure, you do this because you want to do this, you don't consider anyone else's feelings about the issue, you just go out and do it. But there is a political element to that, the different sort of direction that Andrew Tate proposes, which is like, oh, go do it. You want to start a business,
yeah,
go do it. Oh, they say you can't do it. Oh, well, you're going to have a Bugatti and they're not going to have a Bugatti. So
yeah,
that also relates very much to Trump and sort of the way that Trump approaches politics, and frankly, the way that Trump approaches life. I will say this: I am no huge fan of Donald Trump, and I am no huge fan of his policies, but I find the man very inspiring for one reason. And the reason that I find him inspiring most of all is because he is such a go getter. You cannot tell the man no. You tell him no, he'll want to do it even more. The courts tell him no. The Congress tells him no. Everyone his whole life is telling him no. And if you look at Donald Trump's life, it is basically the epitome of you tell me I can't do it, I'm going to do it. And that can take you down some very dark paths. But it's also admirable in the sense that you can do anything, right? That's kind of like
yeah,
what has been pushed on young men for a while. Oh, you just do it. And I think Donald Trump is the case where he very much embodies that. Just do it, right? You want to be a big TV star, you want to be a big entrepreneur, you want to go entrepreneur, TV star, show host, president. You can do anything, right? And I think that's very appealing message to young men. So in a way, the political message of Donald Trump is kind of intertwined with the social message of Andrew Tate and the other sort of red pill people who are out here telling young men that, just get up off your butt and go do it. Well, that's also what Donald Trump embodies in the way that he approaches politics. It's not always good. It's not always good, right? Like I said, it can
yeah,
go down some very dark paths, but it is very appealing to young men and it tickles our fancy quite a bit. Even as someone who's not, sort of into that kind of thing and takes a different perspective on it, it definitely tickles my fancy when I hear somebody say, oh, they told you couldn't do it, go do it.
yeah.
I love that. I think all
I
young
mean,
men love that.
I've said that the image of Trump with his fist in the air, people are going to know what that image is. They're going to recognize that image 100 years from now. And I think that was where he won the presidency,
Mhm.
And Tate will also tell you that. He'll say, you will get knocked down and you will get back up.
Mhm.
It's the losers who don't get back up. Or if they
Mhm.
say, well, I don't know, just, yeah, there's, because I think we have lost some of that. Or, just guys like Michael Jordan playing in the NBA finals with the flu, or Jack Youngblood playing in the Super Bowl with a broken leg, or
Mhm.
Kurt Schilling and pitching with the bloody sock. It's just,
It's
uh,
appealing.
yeah, there's a lot. That's when so many of these guys become heroes, when they do that. And that's what we see.
Resilience, it's resilience. Resilience is appealing. And when it comes to politicians like Trump and the raised fist, by the way, awesome. I love that. Um, and I think the best word I could use to describe that sort of image is Napoleonic.
Yeah,
And there are very few politicians that come along in world history that you could, describe in that way. There's basically, well, not even politicians, just leaders. How many leaders do you know that like got knocked down and got up every single time? It's like history is a cycle of leaders rising and leaders falling, but there are some leaders that never fail, right? And Napoleon obviously fell eventually, but he got up to such a high, plane. He got up to such a height where it was like this man was on top of the world, right? Now there's nowhere to go but down from there. But just to get there is very appealing to young men and just any men. I'm sure it's appealing to you, right? It's very
It
appealing
does,
to
yes.
the male sort of psyche. It's very appealing to us. It's very appealing in the sense that, oh, we want to be that person. That person could be us, right? Even though in most cases you do not have what it takes to become Napoleon. And that's sort of the kind of narrative that gets pushed to young men. Oh, you could do anything. Well, actually, we all have, there's a division of labor here. We're all good at things. I want to be a brain surgeon, but unfortunately, I don't know how to be a brain surgeon. So if I just do it, and I go steal a brain surgeon's uniform and
Yeah.
credentials and sneak into a brain surgery facility and start trying to perform a brain surgery, I don't think it's going to go very well. So you have to understand that you do have limitations. Embrace your limitations. And that's not the message of Andrew Tate and not the message of Donald Trump. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
And like I said, very appealing, but also not very practical.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to be tempered. I mean, Everest is over 29,000 feet. Well, first try a 15,000 foot mountain.
Hmm.
Then maybe a year later try a 20,000 foot mountain, and then
Hmm.
you don't want to necessarily start out with Everest immediately, but
Get to
you
work
you
yourself
can
up.
you can work your way up to that, and just don't be afraid, and don't listen to those negative voices in your head that are always there. And I think move
Right.
on, learn from your mistakes, but don't wallow in them. I mean, I think,
Exactly.
yeah, sometimes I think the things most, yeah, the thing I like least about Tate is what I just call this crass materialism. Look
Hmm.
at somebody like Warren Buffett. He doesn't have a bunch of cars. He has a nice car. He has a nice house. But if you saw how Warren Buffett lived and met him on the street, he'd probably seem like a pretty regular guy. No, and and I know there's some other really rich people who've been that way too. Ross Perot was that way. I know people
Hmm.
who'd interact with him. He'd eat lunch with his employees in the company cafeterias. So yeah, there's definitely a way of being where I think, yeah. So
It's about balance. It's about
that's
balance and moderation, and sort of the opposite of Andrew Tate's message is moderation, right? No moderation whatsoever. Don't do anything in moderation, right? Go for it, get it all. You can do anything, so you can just go for it, and grab the world by the horns. And well, it's a nice idea, but actually you do have limitations, and if you don't understand your limitations and come to terms with them, you will either get yourself killed, you will get
yeah,
yourself in jail, or you will get yourself hurt very, very quickly.
yeah. When Richard Branson graduated from high school, the headmaster at the school said, "Congratulations. I predict you will either go to prison or become a millionaire." And he almost went to prison. But yes, but because he had this situation where he got some records and he didn't pay the right tariffs on them, and he got a tip. So that was where Richard Branson almost went to prison. But yes, but he obviously did end up becoming a very rich man because he was willing to do things.
Owns his own island.
Yeah,
Doesn't
owns
get
his
any
own
richer than
island,
that,
and
does it?
yeah, they like to say he's really more American than he is British. He just starts an airline, starts a record company, just does all these. Yeah, even going back to Benjamin Franklin, or looking back at just the explorers. I mean, whether it be Columbus or Magellan or the guys who go into space, you're really doing something that's just completely unknown. I
Hmm.
I have to say,
It's the American ideal.
it's kind of sad that we don't seem to have that romantic vision of space travel that we used to when I was growing up. But maybe it's just because it's happening so often now, though.
Hmm.
It's
That's exactly why. It's become an essentially privatized industry. So whereas the government was only sending, space, we were only exploring space a little bit every now and then we'd have a launch. Like SpaceX has a launch, what, every month? So it's just
yeah,
become kind of commonplace now. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that we don't have such a romantic vision anymore. We're looking beyond space. We're looking to Mars and, Mars colonization. And it may sound ridiculous now. Well, so did walking on the moon sound ridiculous before it happened. And so the thing that is really appealing about, Andrew Tate's philosophy, and also I think, Trump's, is that, well, it always sounds, the one thing I agree with is it always sounds ridiculous, and everybody always tells you you can't do it until you go do it and you just rub it in their face, right? And like I said, it's
Yeah.
it's very, very appealing because it is the American ideal. They tell you you can't do something, you go do it, and then you just talk about it forever, right? That's great. It's just not how the world works all the time. So you have to understand that there are cases in which people have the wiring to make it work, and there are cases in which they don't. Whether you, fortunately or unfortunately, we live in a world of smart people, dumb people, and average people. And depending on their level of intelligence, they are capable of different things, right? You cannot say to someone who is on the lower end of the spectrum, you can go do anything, because you very clearly cannot. You have limitations. Learning to embrace those limitations, as I said, say, oh, well, you can't do that yet, but you can learn. So you
Yeah.
can embrace the learning experience. And the problem with sort of the red pill philosophy is it's not about learning. You don't learn anything. I think Andrew Tate said reading books is like the most ridiculous thing you can do, right? Because why do you want to read what anybody else has wrote? Go write something yourself. No, it's actually important for you to learn from other people. And people
Yeah.
that are not willing to learn cannot be taught, and people that cannot be taught are not going to go anywhere in life.
True, but I think Tate is just saying that you can learn from experience. And I mean, I would ask, how many books about swimming do you think Michael Phelps ever read? I mean,
Well,
he didn't win all those gold medals at the Olympics because he read books or sat in a class. He did it because he went out into the water and he just did it over and over again. Now, granted, you do
that's
need to
true.
learn some things. You do need to learn some things from other people. You watch film or things like that. But yeah, that's
Yeah, it's kind of on a
because
case by case basis.
yeah,
It depends what you're doing.
because a lot of people use reading or use they get into this whole area of what I'd call analysis paralysis. They just books, reading about something can be a way of avoiding to do it. It's uh,
Hmm.
I mean, Tate
No,
would say,
absolutely.
what Tate would say, why watch sports? Get out there and play in it. I remember another guy said to me, he says, well, why would I want to watch sex when I can have sex? It's same thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you think that? Do you think there's a problem with a lot of young men getting hooked on OnlyFans or stuff like that, or other things? Or
Hmm.
I don't really know that much.
Listen, sex is the world's oldest industry. It has
Yes, it is.
always existed as an industry. It has taken many different forms throughout the years. It has always been appealing to young men and young women alike. You can say that it's much easier to access now. Like if I wanted to, I could pick up my phone and type in
Yeah.
onlyfans.com, right? And the access was much less, frequent, or much less available in earlier generations, but it was still
Yes.
there if you really wanted it. I mean, if you were in ancient Greece and you wanted to see, what you can see every day today, you just, you'd take and you'd carve it, right? Uh, you'd make a statue. Um, so that is something that has always existed, and I think will always exist. There is a problem, though, that it is so available. There's no real solution to that, because that was inevitable with the rise of technology. There are two things that humans are really, really good at, and really want quick access to, and that is killing people and sex, right? We've gotten a lot better at killing people, and we've gotten a lot better at accessing the latter, right? That's just kind of the progression of human history.
Or at
So it
least
is going
accessing
to
the
continue to
good.
happen. Yeah, exactly. So it is going to continue to happen. It is human nature. I don't have to like it, but I can recognize that it's problematic that it's so easily accessed at such a young age. Now, that is a big problem, because, you have 12, 13, 14, even younger, that know everything, right?
Yeah.
And there is something to be said for older generations that just kind of had to learn. um they learned later, right? later on in life, they kind of, they kind of had to pick it up as they go along, and now that's just not the case. So I think that's a problem. And yeah, there is a problem with young men becoming addicted to OnlyFans and pornography and stuff like that in general. I think something like 97% of men admit to, participating in pornography consumption on a weekly, at least a weekly basis. That's
Oh,
an issue, and it can be a problem for relationships. And I think in many ways it's one of the reasons that the dating world is just so messed up, because men can access what they want anytime they want it, and they develop these very romanticized and unrealistic expectations. And then when they actually get out into the dating world, they very quickly learn that it's a lot different. So that can be a problem, absolutely.
well, women have their own form of that. The most popular genre in fiction writing, of course, is romance, and it's not even close. I mean, they don't look at the pictures; they just read the stories. So
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's a problem for young people in general. I mean, I don't like I said, I don't think there's a government solution, obviously, because people need to be able to do, what they want to do as long as they're not harming other people. I think that's pretty much a statement, the basics of libertarianism, right? Um, but if you are harming yourself, you don't need to be participating in that behavior. If it's becoming an addiction and becoming a problem, but I just can't think of any real solution to it short of, just turning off the internet.
yeah,
And I don't think anybody wants to do that.
and getting addicted to the screen or whatever can just takes you time away from those other things. I mean,
Mm.
I uh, I'm of that age bracket where the first time I saw naughty pictures was in a magazine. Uh, that didn't last much longer, but it wasn't, at least at our age, it wasn't. It was, we could get it, but it wasn't that easy to get.
Wasn't easily accessible.
Yeah, it's too easily accessible, and I think with the Ezra, I go to the gym, and I this isn't necessarily related to sex, but I had this exchange, and somebody said, "Are you using that?" I said, "Yes, I'm using this." And then he said again, "Are you using this?" I said, "Yes, I'm using this." I just pointed to the bench, and he said, third time, he says, "Are you using this?" And I said, "Yes, I'm using it. Take out the fucking earbuds, and you'll hear me." I was just, like these headset zombies who aren't interacting with people and aren't socializing. It's like, not to mention, you're not being aware of your space, which is kind of crazy. I wouldn't walk around, wearing headsets in a really bad neighborhood in Mexico, because who knows because that would, well, he's an easy target, but yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
really
yeah,
is.
I have the same frustration. I think there's a very low, and this is sort of, change of topic, but that's okay. I think there's low situational awareness in general, just with people. And I don't know if it's an issue necessarily. It kind of depends on where you are. Uh, if you're walking in a place where you could fall and kill yourself, it's probably an issue. If you're
Yeah.
walking in a place where it's unsafe because there's gangs around, it's definitely an issue. I see people go into the Whole Foods all the time with their AirPods in, and they probably got blaring music in their
Mhm.
ears, and I can't help but think, and this is kind of the way my brain works. I don't know if you can relate to this, but like I'm thinking, so in the unlikely event that there is a mass shooting here and somebody starts popping off, right? You're not going to hear anything, and you're going to be one of the first people to die because
Yes.
you are listening to the latest Cardi B hit or something, and you're not paying any attention to your surroundings. So yeah, I think that can be an issue, but again, case specific. Another thing that I just want to get out of the way here is sort of like, yeah, I can have my opinions, and you can have your opinions, and Andrew Tate can have your opinions. You are aware of the phrase that I'm not going to use about opinions and something else, but everyone has one, right? Um, but there's also a lack of nuance. And there's just no nuance out there. I did all these different, wannabe philosophers, Broics or whatever you want to call them. They want to talk about, you just need to do this, and you only need to do this, and this is the only way, and it's this way or the highway, right? Well, no, it's not. There are a lot of nuance that is present in political issues. There's a lot of nuance that's present in social issues. There's a lot of nuance that's present in analysis of society in general. Not everyone is a monolith. We don't live in a hive mind. Come on now. We have to be
Yeah.
a little bit nuanced. I try to be nuanced. People hate me for it. I try to be as nuanced as possible. I try to look at an issue and say, okay, I think that's dumb. But here are cases in which I don't think it's dumb. And they're like, oh, well, if you think it's dumb, then it must be dumb, period. Right? Well, no, there's certain cases where it might not be, but nobody wants to talk about those cases.
Yeah, there's a lot of things nobody wants to talk about. I do sometimes, I'll see teenagers at a bus stop and I said, they're really not acting like teenagers. I remember how we used to act. We were making noise and talking and they're just all so quiet. It's like they're all looking at these devices. It's like, yeah, I don't know if it doesn't seem normal, but that's but what do you think? Also, are a lot maybe young men aren't thinking about starting families yet, but are they concerned about things like, can I buy a house? Can I start a family? Are they worried about, whether or not they'll ever find a job and the
Yeah,
rise of
absolutely.
artificial intelligence? I mean,
This ties. Oh, I really wish we could get into AI. I have so many thoughts on that, but I want to go in sort of a different direction. I want to talk about buying a house, being financially stable. These are all things that young men do absolutely care about. It's also one of the issues where there's a lot of proneness or leaning towards victim mentality.
yeah,
And the problem with victim mentality is for there to be a victim, there must be a perpetrator, right? So if you are a victim, you must be uh, being victimized by someone else, right? You have to find a scapegoat for your victimization. And the issue with victim culture is, we turn in all different directions, right? And this has been an issue. I could pull up, really old, sort of KKK propaganda, which I'm not going to do, trust me. But I could pull up really old KKK propaganda where it's showing like Irishmen taking all the jobs, right? And or
oh yes,
the Italians are taking all the jobs from you, and you're a red-blooded American, and you need to have those jobs. Why are all those dirty Italians taking your jobs, right? So
yeah,
this sort of victim mentality has been a thing since newspapers have existed or since any way to portray information has existed. There's always been victim mentality, but I don't know if we've ever seen it to the extent that we see it. And it comes and goes. I think it rises and falls with populism. And that's the really dangerous part about populism is if you take it to the extreme, it can lead in some very dark directions. I think in the United States today, there's a lot of victim mentality coming from the right, which is weird because typically you'd see that sort of victim mentality coming from the left. And we talk a lot about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was like everybody's favorite word 2 years ago, right? And kind of still is. But in a lot of ways, a lot of people on the right are kind of embracing a form of DEI that's kind of DEI in the opposite direction, right? And I believe in merit. So I don't think that DEI is ever okay. I don't think it's okay for native born people. I don't think it's okay for minorities. I don't think it's okay for anybody. That's one of those issues where I don't think there's very much nuance. I think in pretty much every case, merit should be the top consideration. It shouldn't be immutable characteristics, right? A lot of people on the right are going to disagree with me, and that's okay. I'll debate you on it any day of the week. But I think one of the fundamental issues that we have today is just the fact that victim mentality has been embraced by the right. And it used to be only embraced by the left. It used to be the right. We're just kind of like, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It'll be okay. Right. Well, now we're just finding all these different scapegoats for the reason that we can't buy a house or the reason that we can't get a job. And we're not kind of looking and saying, you know, maybe, just maybe, you might be the problem. Right.
yeah.
Nobody's willing to have that conversation. Nobody's willing to have the conversation about, how maybe you are causing your own issue or how maybe your way of looking at the world or your way of doing life, of existing, is causing your existence to be less than ideal.
Yeah, that's why I can't blame immigrants, and it just seems like you want to blame this group. It really is remarkable how the decline of prejudice against Italians and against Irish in this country. It's pretty amazing how it's went away, really without much. It just shows to me that all these prejudices can go away, but I
Well,
do.
scapegoats come and go, right? It's kind of
And
like,
you have more
fill in the blank.
and you always have more scapegoating when things are bad.
Mhm.
when the economy's bad, or that's
or perceived to be bad, even if
yeah.
it's really good.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot of these people, and some of these people really just come up with this attitude. No, everything's great. If people think their lives suck, telling them that their lives are great is not going to win them over, even if
No,
they're wrong.
no.
And I do think, and one thing I like a lot of things about Nick Gillespie, but he seems to have this idea of freedom. That freedom means, for example, well, I have more freedom if I can buy 10 brands of toothpaste instead of 4 brands of toothpaste. And I don't really that's not what freedom means to me. Freedom just means freedom from coercion. I mean, yeah, maybe it's nice if you can buy 10 brands of toothpaste instead of 4, but I don't see that. And some of these people, they call that more of a practical liberty as opposed to political liberty. But so,
Well, everyone has their own definition of
yeah,
freedom, right? One of the fundamental issues that we face is that people that believe in freedom or hold freedom as their highest end in politics or in whatever analysis they're doing, freedom is always, it's just like existentialism, right? Freedom is most important. Um, those type of people always seem to argue with each other, and people that have different definitions of freedom. And I don't think we really understand that we all believe in freedom. We just believe in different conceptions of freedom. So maybe like let's move toward freedom and kind of join together to do that rather than fighting each other and trying to get each other canceled. Right?
yeah,
That seems like a good thing to do.
yeah. I do hope that things, it's a very interesting time though. So I don't know if men are going to, but I also think we've got a lot of creative people out there, and hopefully the creative people can figure things out. But it's really hard to say where we'll go from here. Is there anything else we haven't covered yet here? Or this might go into what men are thinking about. I mean, I don't know. The whole dating market, for example, seems to be a disaster. It's
I think really, really big issue with the dating market, and this is one of my hot takes, is that there's just too much customization, right? I mean, it's like it's like you build your ideal partner in some of these dating apps, right? And I know that Tinder is looking at a feature where they're going to roll out where you can choose the height of the people you want to be in your orbit. I just think that's nuts. Like, I understand that people want what they want, and they kind of want to be able to just, take some of the hard part out of dating. But whatever happened to like finding someone not based on attributes, but based on shared interests? Or
yeah,
meeting someone at church or meeting a coworker. Whatever happened to that? It seems like everyone's meeting online these days. And I don't hate online dating, but I think when it's taken to its extreme, where there's too much customization, where you're basically just building the person you want to be with and you don't have to do any of the work, that's one of the reasons why these relationships are fizzling out very quickly.
Ezra. Funny thing is, I think one person did a study and they found out that the things that really bonded couples weren't shared likes, but shared things that they hated. I can meet a woman and I can talk about a movie. And for example, you sit down and you talk about a movie that you hate, and you find out somebody else who hates that movie, and you bond with them almost instantly. It's so weird the way that works. And I think a lot of these dating sites, and I don't think they look at the things that really make a difference. I mean, I've noticed, for example, that I've often had a I've often bonded very well with women who had older parents like I did. My parents were 36 and 39, and there's nothing on any website I've ever seen was how old were your parents? But that seems to be because you have these underlying subconscious connections, I think, that aren't really reflected in these things. There's a lot of things. Shared dislikes can certainly be a difference, or yeah, and I do think there's a reluctance sometimes to just get out there, and you got to get out there and meet people. And I learned quickly you can't really know anything until because when you meet somebody, you find out so many things about them. They've done a
Well, the
study
thing,
too, that women just all go to say the top. Well, Rollo Tomasi noticed that it was the top 4.5%. I don't know that they apparently got that, and then the other men are just left in the dust. So it's
Well, I think one of the biggest issues with dating in general is not even just customization, but just the lack of consideration of values, right?
Uh,
I mean, that's a big one. That's a really big one. If you find someone who doesn't share your values, it doesn't matter how attracted you are to that person, it's not going to work.
yeah,
Believe me, it's not going to work. If your values are different, it is not going to work. Friendship might work, anything else is not going to work. So, and it's not even, not necessarily, I want to clarify, it's not necessarily about different values, right? It's about opposing values. It's about having values that are diametrically opposed to each other, right? So, like, for example, it would be very, very difficult for someone who takes a stoic approach to life to make a relationship work with a hedonist. Very, very difficult. And I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying if you have opposing values, it's going to make the road to a successful relationship much, much rockier. And that's something that's just not being taken into account with all these dating apps. It's like, oh, she's cute. Oh, she's this height. Oh, she's that. Like she's into crochet. Okay, weird. Okay, whatever. Right? It doesn't matter. Does she share your values? And that's something that a dating app can never tell you. You actually have to go out and meet
yeah.
people.
That I did hear somewhere that they find that young people who go to Christian colleges, they seem to come out married because they see it as a place where I'll find my husband or wife here, and they come out with
Mm,
that attitude. But
yeah. Used to be a lot more
uh,
common to meet your spouse in college or even in high school. There's actually a
well,
chart. If you ever want to have some fun, go look at a chart. I think it was made with AI, or maybe it was made by some, study group, but they charted the propensity to meet in different locations or in different ways throughout the centuries. And it starts out, it's like family is at the top, and then it's church, and then it's like in college, and then like high school, and it just kind of goes back and forth until the invention of the internet, and then online just starts creeping up, and then within the first 5 years of the internet it's like number three, and then within the first 7 years of the internet it's right there at the top, and everything else is drastically declining.
yeah, I think the main problem with the internet, there's just too many women who want to talk about dating but don't actually want to date. It's but I've sometimes noticed that too. I have guests, I have potential podcast guests who want to talk about coming on my show, but don't actually want to come on my show. But it's not quite the same way. It's a and eventually, but if you have an abundance mentality, I mean, there aren't that many places though where you can approach women now and not hear something about it or say, well, that guy shouldn't be approaching me. Sometimes young men will come into some group and says, yeah, there's this woman I know at work, and a bunch of guys will say to him, no, don't do it.
Yeah, it's we live in kind of a safe dating culture. It's one of the points where I tend to agree with the red pillars, is like, oh, we live in a safe dating culture, it's all dating apps and all this. Is like, well, yeah, kind of. We do. Nobody wants to put in the work to, actually get to know somebody. They want to meet them online and then just, go right to it. You know what I mean? And that's not the pathway to a successful relationship in most cases. But again, I'm trying to be nuanced. And even though I have very strong opinions in the opposite direction, it's very funny. I actually, you may know this, I have strong opinions on tariffs, right? It's kind of a big deal to me. I'm not very protectionist in general, right? I kind of think it's probably one of the most silly economic policies in the history of the world. Okay. And I hosted a conversation with Dr. Per Beeland, who's a good friend of mine, the Mises
Yeah,
Institute,
yeah,
and
paradox.
he's fantastic.
Oh yeah,
Have you spoken to him?
oh yeah, I
Um,
definitely know who he is. He's a great guy.
and I was in a position to be nuanced and to pretend that I don't have a position, and which is very difficult for me to do. So I'm trying to get better at being a little bit more nuanced in the way that I speak and in the way that I comport myself, and just try to realize that, well, I may think it's silly, but maybe other people don't. So there's some wiggle room for debate. I think that's just called getting older.
Yeah, maybe so. Do we often hear from women about this. What are young men saying about what's going on with women's sports right now? Because young men
Um,
like sports. I mean, it doesn't directly impact them, but you occasionally end up with this guy who wants to play sports with the girls, and they're like, "Why is he doing this?"
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot about a lot of men that want to get into women's sports, right?
But I mean, no, the
Whether
transgender
whether
stuff
or
and
not,
stuff like that,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going with this. It's like you hear a lot about transgender men that want to participate in women's sports. You don't hear about a lot of transgender women that want to participate in men's sports. It's odd. Um, but also, I mean, it's just one of those issues where it happens. It absolutely happens. It probably shouldn't happen. It's not as big of an issue as, people like Riley Gaines would want you to believe, where it's happening everywhere and it's just there's like this epidemic of it occurring. I mean, yeah, it is happening. It definitely happens. And it shouldn't happen. But
yeah,
also, it's not happening on such a wide scale that it requires this massive reaction. But the thing about being reactionary is that if you're reactionary, you can only react, right? And you need to have things to react to. So when times are good and there's not really any big problems to react to, you have to create problems to react to, you know? And I'm not
yeah,
saying that's the case with men and women's sports, and I absolutely oppose that. I'm just saying that in many cases, what is going on there is it's just men that can't be successful in men's sports. So they decide that they're going to take the easy route, right? Should not be allowed to do that, but it is occurring. And it's occurring, I think, in a way that it shouldn't be, right? And men are talking about it. Men are definitely talking about, the Riley Gaines situation and, transgender men and women's sports, but they're talking about it in a more humorous way than anything else. And that just tends to be the case with men discussing women's sports in general. I mean, there's not very many men that will admit to watching the WNBA, right?
yeah,
Not a lot of men that watch women's sports. If they do watch women's sports, it's not for the sports, if you catch my drift. Um, but yeah, they're definitely talking about it, and it's an issue, and they're thinking about it. They're saying, well, this is weird. This shouldn't be happening. But other than that, they don't really have very many strong
yeah,
opinions on it. Young men, in particular, is what I'm talking about. Now, if you have an older person, they think it's like the next Holocaust.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I know what you're saying. There are probably guys out there who'd love to get with Caitlin Clark, for example, or get with Riley Gaines, or yeah, there's lots of guys
I'm
out there.
sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if there's that much more to say about this. Who do you think are some really good men that maybe older men that younger men can look up to nowadays?
What do you consider older?
A guy who
40s?
maybe has at least one kid out of the house.
Guy who maybe has at least one kid out of the house. That's an interesting question.
Yeah,
Uh, you're putting me on the spot here because there's not a lot of them.
I think Nick
Well, I think
Freitas
that
is a really good guy. He seems
I
like
do.
he's
Yeah,
solid.
yeah.
Uh,
I like Nick Freitas's brand of sort of masculinity, right?
yeah,
I think that's good. I don't think he takes it too far. I definitely think Andrew Tate takes it too far.
yeah, and
As far as men for young men to look up to philosophically, I mean, I've gained you know I think great wisdom and way to live my life, or not even a way to live my life, just cues to take from someone's philosophy who's older. Mark Manson I think he has a great life philosophy.
yeah,
He's very popular. He's an
yeah,
existentialist. I am not an existentialist, but
yeah,
at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because I really like his philosophy. Jonathan Haidt or Jonathan Haidt, I think is another one.
yeah,
I think
Jonathan.
he has
Yeah,
some great stuff, and he talks about some very interesting issues, particularly a lot of what we've been talking about, which is just the social media and the internet and the effect that's having on the world and particularly on young people. So if you want to talk about philosophers to look up to, I think those are some names that I would throw out there. And I would also
yeah,
say Jordan Peterson, even though in many ways I disagree with him, but I can also recognize he's a very smart person. And I think 12 Rules for Life is a great book and everyone should read it at least once. So, you know, those are
okay.
older men, I suppose.
Yes. Well, that's good. Oh, and by the way, before I go, I forgot to say I do not care about Glenn Greenwald's videos and photos being leaked. I should not know anything about this, and I'm not going to reward the people who did this. So
My position on that issue,
yeah,
I share your perspective. I don't care.
yes. but I did want to say that since this is the first show I've done since that happened, and I know I heard good things about him. Yeah, so I do want to. I'd like to live in a world where all men can be themselves, and we're always going to have gay people with us. They've always been there,
Hmm.
but but there are some but there are some gay people, gay men, I think, who would probably be great dads and they're husbands who have no interest in sex. So they're, but anyway, I won't go down that road. That's what Justin Raimondo used to talk about when he was still alive. The guy who founded antiwar.com. Okay, well,
Right.
anything to say before we go, Ezra? It's you were on limited time here, but I think we covered what we need to cover. So
Oh, really? It's been a pleasure, being
yeah,
on your show again. I always really enjoy it.
yeah,
I have different kind of conversations, right? I like to have different conversations, deep conversations. Although this one
yeah,
didn't go as deep as we possibly could because I'm on a time limit. But really
yeah.
appreciate you having me back.
I just thought of a great topic. We should just talk. Could you just talk about the entire history of Tennessee? Tennessee definitely has its own unique history. But yeah, okay.
That
Well,
it does.
yeah. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. And people are giving me money at buymeacoffee.com. Thank you, Ezra Wyrick. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.